Welcome to the show. Regardless of how cautious you are behind the wheel, chances are that you or someone you know have paid the price of speeding in school zones in Hagerstown. That's all thanks to the automated speed cameras around the city. This week, the Board of County Commissioners unanimously approved a budget allowing the Washington County Sheriff's Office to move forward with speed cameras throughout the county. Ron, do you think this is overstepping the boundaries?
I'm not sure that the vote for the budget may have been unanimous, but I think there were some commissioners that made a caveat to it that they did support the budget, but they didn't support speed cameras.
But speed cameras are on.
Speed cameras are on, but you can support the budget and not vote against the budget because of speed cameras if you note that you didn't support speed cameras. So I'm not sure it was unanimous that everybody supported speed cameras. Speed cameras is a very difficult issue to talk about because people get all excited that they're being surveilled and they can't, face their accuser. I drive in D.C. good bit, there's speed cameras. I drive in other communities, there's speed cameras. Around here in school zones, I totally support speed cameras in school zones. But once you expand the boundaries beyond school zones, I think you're infringing on the public's right, and I think that you have a sheriff's department, a police department, a state police department, that's what their jobs are. Now, if we're going to do something with those officers, to do something else other than to catch speeders, then I'd like to know what it is.
Well, and I have a couple of issues with the speed cameras. The first, I'm not so concerned with being surveilled and not being able to face one's accuser. I think the first issue that we run in with the speed cameras is the fact that in a lot of the school zones, in Hagerstown particularly, and I've been victim of some of these speeding tickets as well, the speed limits are too low. So on 11, for instance, 30 is too low of a speed limit in front of Northern High. The other problem is that those speed limits are supposed to be impingent upon school times, but they don't vary. So the speed limit is 30 regardless whether school's in session or not.
But the speed cameras aren't always on.
I've gotten tickets outside of school hours.
Outside of school hours, yes, but there are times when they're off. And I don't know what those times are off the top of my head, but they're not on 24/7. Am I correct on that?
I'm not sure. I don't think they're on all the time.
Well, and here's my issue with this. It's a money-making venture because people are going to speed along those routes. Honestly, at $40 a pop, are you really going to miss a day's worth of work to go to court and contest this? No. You're just going to pay the fine. There's no points related to it because they can't prove who was driving the vehicle, and you're going to go on with your merry life.
So with the city speed cameras, my understanding is you have to be going 12 miles an hour above the speed limit. So if in that 31-mile zone, you can be going 41, just don't go 42.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that they're calibrated that carefully.
Well, I think
because I can tell you that I have not driven 12 miles over the speed limit and have gotten tickets in the mail.
So I think that's...
And again, it's not worth fighting it because I can't afford to take a day off of work and go to the courthouse and argue with Joe, Bob, whomever.
And I think that 12 miles an hour accounts for the fact that your speedometer can be 5 miles an hour off and their camera can be 5 miles an hour off. And you add the 2 plus 1, I think that's where they came up with the 11 miles an hour.
12 miles an hour. Which is giving a 1 mile an hour grace period to each of the potential instabilities on either side. I can tell you I've never gotten stopped by a physical police officer where I could argue how fast I was going. Not that it happens very often, but I have had issues with this automated speed cameras on a regular basis, and I think that calibration is very relative. Again, because they're banking on the fact that people are not going to contest it because there are no points associated. It's a small fee, relatively speaking. Now, to me, it's a small fee. To somebody else, it may not be a small fee. I honestly, and I'm not opposed to having automated controls by any stretch of the imagination, and I think it is important to have controls, especially around school zones. I think there have been enough scandals related to the automated speed cameras, especially in the state of Maryland, and with some of the companies that were doing this, remember, this is not run by the police department. These are deployed by a contractor who is then making a commission on top of whatever tickets they get. So they have all the incentive in the world to make sure that those are not 100% calibrated correctly.
Well, again, it gets back to the debate. Should you have them inside school zones? I don't have a problem with it. Outside, as a revenue producer to collect revenue for a department, I'm not sure that's a wise use and the best use of technology.
But they do produce a lot of revenue. I think in the city, the one year that I had looked, it was like something like $750,000.
Oh, I think the revenue's there, but where does the right of citizens end? Where does the sheriff's department, the city police department, the state police, where does their authority begin, and how much do you turn over to automatic surveillance?
Well, and the other problem, I think, honestly, Ron, is the fact that, again, if the sheriff's department, if the state police department, if the city police department were administering these cameras themselves, it'd be one thing, but it's the slippery slope of outsourcing enforcement to private companies that are for-profit companies. Same thing that's happening with our prisons, same thing that's happening in some areas with our police forces. We're turning over mechanisms that should be the sole purview of law enforcement that are supposed to be government employees over to private companies that aren't there to stand up for the Constitution. They're there to make a profit.
But let's also talk about the administration, because my understanding is that each of these potential tickets, so Colin goes 43 in that 30-mile zone, and they generate, the one that gets me, by the way, is the one by the middle school there on the other road there.
On Northern.
Yeah, on Northern Avenue. That's the one that's always gotten me, actually twice in one day, but we won't talk about that. But there is a policeman who is assigned to actually review those, and he or she makes the final decision of whether the ticket goes out. So from an administration standpoint, in my mind, at least at some level, it is being administered by the police department. There's not some automated camera that just automatically sends
But
Ron
the police
Bowers
officer
tickets.
only has the information that's being provided by the camera itself, which is not under the control of the police department.
See that, and
So
I think Colin, you hit the point. The point is, if it were administered and run by and ensured that it met the specifications and it was calibrated appropriately, if the police department did it and it was totally their personnel doing it, I don't think I would have too much of an issue with it. But an outside, look at what happened with prisons. They decided they would put prisons and let the outside, the private sector run prisons, and they have all kind of issues. Keep it in the sheriff's department, let the sheriff's department, the police department, the state police run them, let them do their own calibration and have the whole thing and keep the private sector out of it. Now, you're a private sector person.
I am.
Now, what do you think?
Honestly, I support the speed cameras, but that may be because I have 3 young kids in the Washington County school system, and my kids go to Williamsport, and I have seen the speed at which people drive down Clifton Drive, and it's not
Yeah, but now there's a difference. We said in school zones. I don't have a problem with them in school zones.
Okay,
I'm talking outside of school zones.
So outside of school zones, I have heard horror stories, whether they're true or not, of cities actually decreasing the yellow light time so they catch more people at the stoplight camera, doing all of these kind of crazy things for specifically a money grab. So I think outside of the school zones, it gets a little more fuzzy in my mind. Construction zones, I think there is a big issue in construction zones for construction workers that are potentially at risk.
Here's a goofy question for you, and I think construction zones are a completely different matter, and I think you deal with those separately. In areas like school zones that we know are going to be permanently an area of concern, and especially in Clifton Drive, so the Williamsport High School and Middle School, the Springfield Middle School area, why not just put in speed bumps? What is the benefit of having a speed camera, which is not going to stop somebody from speeding? It's simply going to get them a ticket several weeks later.
It won't stop them the first time. I would argue it'll probably stop them the second time, because I will tell you.
What didn't stop you in the same
you twice
day?
in the same day.
Well, but then when I got the ticket, trust me, I don't go. And the other one that caught me is South High.
Oh,
by South
that's
High.
a tough one.
That is a
Coming
tough
over
one.
that hill.
Because that one, that's a nice straight. It's a nice wide highway. I feel the need for speed, baby, on that one.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take the last word. Next up on the flip side, we'll take a closer look at some extra funding making its way around the county. Stay tuned. We're back in 3 minutes.